Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for more Southwest lost gold and treasure tales. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. For further desert tales, hit the notification bell. If you would like to help support my time and channel, hit the super thanks heart icon at the bottom of the video and contribute. This is very helpful. Relax and enjoy. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we explore the mysteries and legends that shape the American Southwest frontier. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a fascinating tale of lost treasure from the Upper San Animas River Valley, a rugged expanse stretching across northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. This isn't just another campfire story or prospector's tall tale. It's a legend that persists to this day among Spanish-American residents of the region, who believe that somewhere in those rugged valleys lies a fortune in buried gold waiting to be rediscovered. Before we begin our tale, let's set the scene. The mid-1800s was a time of tremendous change in the American Southwest. The region was still adjusting to its relatively recent transfer from Mexican to American control. Traditional Native American territories were increasingly under pressure from settlers, trappers, and prospectors. The discovery of gold in California had sparked a fever that spread throughout the West, leading countless men to risk everything in pursuit of instant riches. Our story begins with a French Canadian trapper named Pierre. Like many of his countrymen, Pierre had worked his way south from Canada, following the beaver populations through the Rocky Mountains. These trappers were remarkable men, skilled wilderness survivors who could read the landscape like a book and navigate territories few white men had ever seen. They were also natural explorers, often the first to discover the resources that would later draw waves of settlers. In the mid-1800s, Pierre had made his way down the spine of the Rockies until he reached Santa Fe, the bustling capital of the New Mexico Territory. After selling his season's worth of furs, he did what many trappers did. He enjoyed what we might politely call a grand fling in the capital city. Such celebrations often ended the same way, with empty pockets and a need for winter shelter. But Pierre was different from the typical broke trapper. When he took shelter in a small New Mexican village for the winter, he carried with him something that would change many lives: a piece of gold-laden quartz that hinted at unimaginable riches. Throughout those cold months, Pierre became a familiar sight in the village, showing his precious specimen to anyone who would look, a piece of quartz shot through with veinlets and masses of pure yellow gold. "I tell you it is there, senors," he would say, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Enough for all of us. A wide vein rich enough in gold to work with the Arastra. A few weeks and we will live like kings." His tales fell on eager ears, particularly those of Juan Sanchez and other villagers who carried the proud blood of Spanish conquistadors in their veins. For these Spanish-American settlers, Pierre's stories resonated with centuries-old legends of lost mines and hidden riches. The promise of gold proved irresistible. Despite very real concerns about hostile Native Americans in the territory, a group of 28 horsemen assembled, along with 30 pack animals to carry provisions, and, they hoped, their future riches. The scale of the expedition was impressive, but it also left their village vulnerable. Only the old men, women, and children remained behind to tend the fields. If the expedition failed, the coming winter would be harsh indeed. These weren't ordinary travelers, but skilled horsemen mounted on fine steeds descended from the Arabians brought by the conquistadors. Though their clothing might have been ragged, they were well armed, a necessary precaution in the dangerous territory they would traverse. Their journey took them through the changing landscapes of the Southwest. They started in sage flats dotted with pinyon and cedar, moved through desert country, and eventually entered forests of yellow pine. Game was plentiful, mountain streams provided water, and initially the journey seemed blessed with good fortune. Pierre led them confidently, though he took care to skirt the edges of the San Juan Mountains through the desert country when possible. But their luck would change dramatically. After many days of travel, Pierre led them to a low, sage-covered mesa overlooking a wide valley. From their vantage point, he spotted numerous wisps of smoke rising through the pine forest below, clear signs of a large Native American encampment. This discovery forced them to take a more treacherous route through the ridges, fighting their way through snow and cross canyons for 3 demanding days. Finally, they reached their destination, a wide bench of grassland along the river, and there, in a narrow canyon above their camp, they found exactly what Pierre had promised, a quartz vein intersecting the canyon walls, with visible gold that could be seen without even digging. The men quickly established a permanent camp and built a primitive ore-crushing mill near the river. Days turned into months as they extracted more and more gold. The vein would narrow and widen, as gold veins often do, but their store of precious metal grew steadily. Game remained plentiful, life was good, but there was always an undercurrent of tension. They knew they weren't alone in that valley. Meanwhile, in a meadow above what we now call the upper Animas River Valley, a Ute chief was receiving troubling reports from his scouts. The chief had heard stories of white men coming to southern valleys, initially searching for gold but ultimately staying to plunder Indian villages, steal their women, and drive the native people from their ancestral homes during harsh winters. Though these southern tribes weren't friends of the Utes, the chief recognized the pattern and made a fateful decision. The white men shall not leave this valley. Nature itself would soon force the miners' hand. A sudden heavy snowstorm on the ridges above made their original route impassable. With winter approaching, they had no choice but to attempt to leave through the valley. They packed their gold, now filling numerous buckskin sacks, onto their animals and began their journey out. The expedition made it as far as a small hill surrounded by yellow pine forest. They made camp, hobbling their horses in a nearby meadow. But when the morning fog cleared, every single horse was gone. 5 men went to search for them. They were never seen again. The remaining men knew exactly what this meant. The Utes had made their move. Trapped on the hill without water, the men made a crucial decision. They dug a large hole and buried their hard-won treasure, dozens of buckskin sacks filled with gold, including rough lumps as large as a man's hand. They covered it carefully with dirt, pine needles, and brush. Then, carrying what provisions they could, they split up and attempted to escape. Of all those men, only Pierre and Juan survived to reach their village. The fate of their companions remains unknown to this day, though the presence of numerous Ute warriors in the valley leaves little doubt about their likely end. The story might have been lost to history, but in 1899, a Spanish-American named Pedro Giron met an elderly Pierre in a New Mexico village. Pierre was old and broken by then, never having recovered from the hardships of that escape. He had never returned to the valley, his appetite for adventure completely gone. But he shared every detail with young Pedro, the route they'd taken, the landmarks along the way, the location of the hill where they'd buried the gold. Pedro became convinced that the location was in the Animas River Valley of southwestern Colorado. The combination of features Pierre described, the wide valley, hot springs, and red cliffs, matched perfectly. Pedro even believed he'd found evidence of the camp in the canyon above, though time and nature had taken their toll. A narrow-gauge railroad built through the canyon in the late 1800s may have erased many of the remaining signs. Pedro Giron worked as a section foreman on that very railroad, spending his free time fishing in the area where he believed the mine was located. He carried the secret until his death in a car accident, having shared the details with only a few trusted individuals. While many local versions of ill-fated Spanish expeditions and buried treasure exist in the San Juan area, Pedro may have been the last person alive to have spoken with an actual member of this particular expedition. To this day, the cache of gold remains undiscovered, as does the mine from which it came. Somewhere in the upper Animas River Valley, beneath decades of natural debris or carefully concealed by those long-ago Native Americans, a fortune in gold may still be waiting. It's a reminder of the countless stories of adventure, tragedy, and buried treasure that lie scattered throughout the American West. Some pure fiction, but others, like this one, rooted in historical fact. The story of the lost Animas gold mine is more than just a tale of buried treasure. It's a window into a pivotal time in American history, when different cultures and ways of life collided in the rugged Southwest. It reminds us of the human cost of the search for riches, and perhaps explains why such stories continue to captivate us today. After all, somewhere in those mountains a fortune still waits to be found. I hope you enjoyed this tale of lost gold and frontier adventure. Until next time, this is Southwest Desert, reminding you that the greatest treasures often lie in the stories themselves. Welcome to another video on the Southwest Desert. Our story begins over a century ago, somewhere along the dusty trail that winds from the town of Shakespeare to the ominously named Skeleton Canyon. There, if local legend is to be believed, lies a shallow, abandoned mining shaft filled with an incredible fortune. Over $1 million worth of stolen gold and silver bars, sacks of ancient Spanish coins, and priceless jewels looted from a Mexican cathedral. This immense treasure was said to be the ill-gotten plunder of a notorious gang of bandits led by the infamous outlaw Jim Hughes. He and his crew, consisting of the deadly gunslingers Zwing Hunt, Doc Neal, and Red Curly, were already wanted for their suspected involvement in the bloody Lincoln County War, a conflict made famous by the exploits of Billy the Kid. But their audacious raid on Monterey would be their most daring crime yet. Joining forces with the vicious Estrada gang, Hughes and his men launched their brazen scheme. In the dark of night, they crept into a government corral and made off with 24 mules, the first step in their meticulously planned heist. Crossing the border into Mexico, the bandits descended upon the city of Monterey. They struck first at the local mint and smelter, cleaning out the vaults and making off with a fortune in freshly minted gold and silver bars. Next, they turned their attention to the majestic cathedral that loomed over the town square. Caring nothing for the sanctity of the church, they ransacked the building, snatching jewel-encrusted chalices, gold candlesticks, and gem-studded crucifixes. Anything small enough to carry and valuable enough to be worth the risk. The bandits rode hard for the border under the cover of darkness. By the time the shocked citizens of Monterey realized the extent of the pillaging, Hughes and his gang were already back on U.S. soil, their massive haul estimated to be worth a staggering $800,000, a colossal sum in those days. But there was dissension in the ranks of the thieves. Bad blood quickly developed between the Mexican Estrada gang members and the American outlaws. Mistrust and greed boiled over into violence, and a vicious gunfight erupted. When the dust settled and the echoes of the shots faded, the ground was littered with the bullet-riddled bodies of the Estrada men. Hughes and his remaining crew had prevailed, but not without cost. Zwing Hunt had been badly wounded in the exchange. Fearing the law would soon be on their tail, the bandits knew they needed to stash their treasure quickly. They chose a remote spot close to Skeleton Canyon, New Mexico, to serve as a temporary hiding place for their plundered riches. Hunt, still nursing his festering wound, was tasked with standing guard over the buried loot while the others continued their spree of raids and robberies across the territories. Hughes led his men on a months-long tear of pillaging, striking at stagecoaches, mining camps, and anyone else unfortunate enough to cross their path. But their vicious streak of marauding came to a brutal end with the ruthless murder of a local farmer and his young son. After callously gunning down the innocent pair, the gang stole their wagon and oxen, intending to use them to finally transport their immense treasure trove. Returning to Skeleton Canyon, they found Hunt recovered from his grievous injury and eager to be on the move. The treasure, now believed to be worth over $1 million, was loaded into the stolen wagon. Gold and silver bars were stacked like cordwood. Sacks of ancient coins and priceless jewels pilfered from the cathedral were nestled among the bars. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for the murderous thieves. After an estimated 40 to 50 miles of hard travel over sharp, cutting rocks, the unshod oxen began to falter, their hooves cracked and bleeding, unable to continue hauling the monumental weight of the treasure. Progress ground to a halt. The bandits knew they were in a precarious position. The law would be hunting them. They couldn't risk being caught with the incriminating loot. Thinking quickly, Hughes and his men labored through the night carrying load after load of riches up a nearby hillside. There, they found an abandoned mining shaft, likely dug by some luckless prospector. The men dumped the bullion and coins down the dark hole. Sacks containing the priceless church artifacts and jewelry were tossed in last. Grabbing shovels, the bandits then scattered the rock pile that had accumulated around the mine, filling the opening until it was indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape. Their dark work complete, they turned the oxen free to fend for themselves in the desert, burned the wagon to ashes to hide the evidence, and rode on toward Silver City, their saddlebags jingling with the few coins and baubles they'd held back for spending money. In Silver City, flush with cash, the gang celebrated their success with a prolonged drunken spree. They caroused in the saloons, spending lavishly and drinking heavily. It was a fateful mistake. Drunk on whiskey and their own perceived invincibility, the outlaws grew careless. An argument broke out over a card game. Guns were drawn. And when the smoke cleared, a young man lay dead on the barroom floor, an innocent victim of Hughes and his trigger-happy comrades. The citizens of Silver City, long weary of the depredations of outlaw scum, seized upon this last outrage as a chance for retribution. A posse was hastily formed, and the bandits were forced to flee for their lives into the hills. Enraged and determined not to let the killers escape, the posse tracked the gang relentlessly. One by one, the exhausted outlaws were run to ground. A crack shot felled Doc Neal from his saddle, killing him instantly. Hunt, still weakened from his previous injury, was captured alive and dragged back to the town of Tombstone to face justice. But fate granted him a cruel reprieve when he managed a desperate escape, only to be killed and scalped a few weeks later by Apache warriors. Hughes and Red Curly, the last of the gang, made it to the tiny hamlet of Shakespeare. But their luck had finally run out. The posse caught up with them there, and in a brief but furious gunfight, the two outlaws were captured. The people of Shakespeare knew these men and their crimes all too well, and they had no intention of turning the villains over to the uncertain wheels of justice. Hughes and Curly were roughly hauled into the dining room of the Pioneer House, a sturdy beam chosen to serve as an impromptu gallows. As the grim-faced citizens watched, nooses were lowered over the bandits' heads and tightened around their necks. A desperate Curly made one last attempt to bargain for his life. He offered to lead the townsfolk back to the place where the treasure was buried, promising them unimaginable wealth, if only they would spare him the hangman's noose. But the angry mob would have none of it. They had seen too many innocents brutalized at the hands of men like Curly. With a nod from the impromptu executioners, the stools were kicked away, and Hughes and Curly dropped to their much-deserved deaths. And with the death of the last of the thieves, the secret of the Monterey loot's location died with them. Countless treasure hunters and prospectors have combed the hills around Skeleton Canyon in the decades since, seeking that lost mine shaft filled with a fortune in stolen gold and jewels. They've explored as far afield as El Muerto Springs and Shakespeare, scouring the desert for any sign of the missing loot. But as the years turn to decades, and decades to over a century, the hidden shaft's location has remained a mystery. If it does indeed still exist, it likely lies concealed beneath rockfall and desert vegetation, a secret hoard of history and myth awaiting some lucky wanderer to stumble upon it and become fabulously wealthy overnight. Will the Monterey loot ever be found? Perhaps. The desert is vast, and men's dreams of sudden riches die hard. And somewhere out there under the baking New Mexico sun, resting in eternal silence beneath the dust and creosote, there may yet lie the glinting treasure of doomed outlaws. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into a long-buried past of lost bandit gold. Welcome to today's episode, where we'll be exploring the fascinating legend of Padre LaRue's lost treasure in the Organ Mountains of New Mexico. This tale of gold, faith, and adventure has captivated treasure hunters for generations. Our story begins in 1798 in a small colony in northern Chihuahua, Mexico. A young French priest known as Padre LaRue was tending to his flock of settlers. Times were hard, and the community was struggling with a severe drought that threatened their very survival. One fateful day, a dying soldier arrived at the colony. As Padre LaRue leaned in to hear the man's final words, he received an unexpected gift: the location of a gold deposit in the Sierra de los Órganos, or Organ Mountains. The old soldier, having traveled extensively in the northern regions of New Spain, shared his secret with the Padre, hoping it would save the starving people. The soldier's directions were precise. He told Padre LaRue to travel 10 days north until reaching El Paso del Norte, where the Rio Grande cuts through the mountains. 2 days further north, he would see the stone pipes of the Organ Mountains. At the northern end, he would find a pass and the Spirit Springs. Nearby, at the foot of a high cliff, lay the Cueva Vegas, or Cave of the Meadows, where the gold was hidden. Inspired by this revelation, Padre LaRue gathered his people and presented them with 2 options: return to Mexico and find homes among friends, or embark on a perilous journey to the Organ Mountains in search of gold. The choice was unanimous: gold. The small band of settlers packed their meager possessions and set out on the Camino Real, the royal highway connecting Santa Fe and Mexico. After 12 grueling days, they arrived at a broad green valley with the towering Organ Mountains on the eastern horizon. They found the Rio Grande, just as the soldier had described, and traded with the Indian village of Tortugas for much-needed supplies. Continuing their journey, they reached the pass at the north end of the Organs. There, they discovered the Spirit Springs gushing from the rocks and the Cave of the Meadows. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon chunks of milk-white quartz with evident gold content. They had found their promised land. Padre LaRue, ever the wise leader, established rules for their new settlement. All gold was to be brought to him, and he would use it to purchase supplies and equipment from the valley settlements and El Paso. He stressed the importance of keeping their discovery a secret to prevent outsiders from coveting their wealth. As months turned into years, the community prospered. They built a high stone wall around their village and maintained a constant guard. Inside, stone houses bustled with activity and contentment. They constructed arrastras, ore crushers, and adobe smelters to process the gold, which was then stored in the Cave of the Meadows. However, as Padre LaRue had warned, gold often brings trouble. The first sign of discord arose from an unexpected source: the Padre himself. In the excitement of their newfound wealth, he had neglected to report to the church in Mexico City about the colony's progress. This oversight would soon have serious consequences. Back in Mexico City, the church grew concerned about the lack of communication from Padre LaRue. They dispatched a representative, Señor Maximo Miliano, to investigate. Upon arriving at the original colony site, Miliano found only abandoned ruins. His inquiries led him to the Indian village of Tortugas, where he learned of the colony's new location in the Organ Mountains and their discovery of gold. Miliano traveled to Spirit Springs and demanded to see Padre LaRue. When the Padre appeared atop the village wall, Miliano insisted that the mine and all gold bullion be turned over to the church. Padre LaRue firmly refused, stating that the gold belonged to his people and had been revealed to them by God's grace. Angered by this defiance, Miliano returned to Mexico City. Padre LaRue knew that their peaceful existence was now threatened, and he feared the arrival of gold-seeking hordes. But an even greater danger loomed. The local Apache tribes, resentful of the colonists' presence at their sacred Spirit Springs, had been plotting revenge. One stormy night, they launched a devastating attack on the village. They showered the settlement with arrows, set fire to buildings, and overcame the guards. Padre LaRue made his last stand in the treasure room, guarding the gold until his dying breath. As the attack raged on, a torrential rainstorm broke out. The surviving colonists fled to the canyons and peaks for shelter, listening in terror to the sound of raging floodwaters tearing through their village. When dawn broke and the storm subsided, the survivors returned to find their village in ruins. The mine entrance had been buried under tons of rock and rubble. The cave of the meadows, where Padre LaRue had guarded the gold, was hidden behind a wall of stones that would take years to remove. Devastated, the refugees made their way down to the Rio Grande Valley, where they found refuge among the Mexican colonists who had recently settled there. But the legend of Padre LaRue's gold lived on. In the generations that followed, countless treasure seekers have scoured the Organ Mountains, hoping to uncover the lost gold. The land, once part of Chihuahua, now lies in southern New Mexico, but the allure of the treasure remains as strong as ever. Some tantalizing clues have emerged over the years. In 1907, a prospector claimed to have been shown the old cave by Teso Aguirre, a descendant of one of the original Spirit Springs colonists. However, the actual treasure remained elusive. Colonel A.J. Fountain of Las Cruces, New Mexico, reported finding an old record in either the Masilla Mission or the Dona Ana Mission that described the richest mine in the Spanish Americas, located near the present-day town of Organ, New Mexico. Another intriguing account tells of Spanish refugees stopping in El Paso on their way from Mexico to Spain. They reportedly possessed a church record from Mexico City that gave the exact location of the Spirit Springs mine. Yet, despite these proofs, no one has ever managed to locate the legendary treasure. In later years, the streets of Las Cruces buzzed with tales of Padre LaRue's gold. Local lore speaks of explorers stumbling upon strange caves containing stone couches carved from rock, stained with what appears to be ancient blood. These stories continue to fuel the imaginations of modern-day treasure hunters. The Organ Mountains, with their rugged peaks and hidden canyons, remain a magnet for those dreaming of striking it rich. Men and women continue to spend their lives searching, digging and exploring every nook and cranny of this unforgiving terrain. They're all driven by the hope that just around the next bend, or perhaps in that unexplored cave, they'll finally uncover the golden treasure of Padre LaRue. As we conclude our tale, it's worth noting that while most historical records fail to mention Padre LaRue, the persistence of this legend suggests there may be a grain of truth hidden somewhere in the story. Whether fact or fiction, the tale of Padre LaRue's lost treasure continues to captivate the imagination and drive exploration in the Organ Mountains of New Mexico. The story serves as a reminder of the powerful allure of gold and the enduring nature of legends. It speaks to the human desire for adventure, the quest for sudden wealth, and the romantic notion of uncovering long-lost secrets. While the gold may never be found, the legend of Padre LaRue ensures that the Organ Mountains will always be a place of mystery and possibility. As you drive through southern New Mexico and catch a glimpse of the Organ Mountains on the horizon, take a moment to imagine the determined colonists led by Padre LaRue, the fierce Apache warriors, and the countless treasure seekers who have combed these peaks over the centuries. Who knows? Perhaps the next person to uncover the truth about Padre LaRue's gold could be you. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of one of the Southwest's most enduring legends. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your sense of adventure alive. You never know what secrets might be hiding just around the corner. Welcome to another episode of the Southwest Desert. Today we're diving into a fascinating tale of lost Spanish gold, Apache legends, and one man's mysterious discovery in the rugged Guadalupe Mountains of Texas. Grab your pickaxe and put on your prospector's hat as we embark on a journey through time to uncover the secrets of the lost gold of the Guadalupes. Our story begins in the majestic Guadalupe Mountains, a range that stretches from northwest Texas into New Mexico. At the heart of this tale stands Guadalupe Peak, also known as Signal Peak, the highest point in all of Texas, towering 8,751 feet above sea level. This impressive mountain has long served as a beacon for treasure hunters and adventurers, drawn by whispers of untold riches hidden in its rocky folds. But what makes these mountains so alluring to seekers of lost treasure? The answer lies in a potent mix of historical accounts, Native American legends, and the persistent stories of those who claim to have struck it rich in these unforgiving lands. Let's turn back the clock to the days of Spanish colonization in the American Southwest. In the late 17th century, the region we now know as Texas and New Mexico was part of New Spain, and the Spaniards were ever eager to exploit the natural resources of their new territories. According to legend, a group of Spanish explorers, led by a Captain de Gavilan, made an extraordinary discovery in the Guadalupe Mountains. The story goes that a Native American convert to Christianity from the village of Tabira guided the captain and his party of 30 men to a location known as Sierra de las Cenizas, the Mountain of Ashes. What they found there was beyond their wildest dreams. The expedition returned to Santa Fe, the capital of New Spain's northern frontier, laden with gold nuggets and ore described as wires and masses. It seemed that Captain de Gavilan and his men had stumbled upon an incredibly rich gold deposit. But fortune can be fickle, and the Spaniards' triumph was short-lived. In 1680, the Pueblo Revolt erupted, a massive uprising of indigenous peoples against Spanish rule. The rebellion was devastating for the colonizers. Every Spaniard who didn't flee New Mexico was killed. The village of Tabira was destroyed, and with it, the Native American guide who knew the location of Sierra de las Cenizas. In the chaos and bloodshed of the revolt, the location of this fabulously wealthy gold deposit was lost. Sierra de las Cenizas joined the long list of legendary lost mines that have tantalized treasure hunters for centuries. But the Spanish weren't the only ones who knew about the gold in the Guadalupes. According to historical accounts, the infamous Apache leader Geronimo once made a startling claim. He stated that the richest gold mines in all of the United States lay hidden within the Guadalupe Range. The Apache, after all, were intimately familiar with the lands they called home. It's not hard to imagine that they might have known about rich mineral deposits that remained hidden from European eyes. Geronimo's claim served to fuel the imaginations of prospectors and treasure hunters for generations to come. Now, let's paint a picture of the landscape where all this gold supposedly lies hidden. The Guadalupe Mountains are a rugged, unforgiving terrain of dark lava beds slashed by deep, narrow canyons. These canyons serve as conduits for floodwaters rushing from the mountains to the Pecos River. For most of the year, these canyons are bone dry. Water is a precious commodity in this harsh environment. One of the few reliable water sources is Grapevine Spring in Dark Canyon, north of the famous Carlsbad Caverns. Nearby, there's another geological oddity, a jet of water the size of a man's arm that spouts from the canyon wall for several months each year. It was through these treacherous canyons that the Spanish reportedly transported their gold, following the course of the Pecos River south towards Mexico City. Legend has it that just before a particularly fierce battle with local tribes, 18 loads of pure gold were hastily buried near Grapevine Spring. This cache, if it exists, has never been found. Now we come to perhaps the most intriguing chapter in the saga of the Guadalupe Gold, the story of Ben Sublett. In the late 19th century, as the Texas and Pacific Railroad was pushing its way across the state, an old prospector named Ben Sublett set up camp near what would become the town of Monahans. For years, Sublett scraped by doing odd jobs along the railroad while prospecting in the still dangerous Guadalupe Mountains to the north. Then one day, something extraordinary happened. Sublett walked into a saloon with a small sack of gold nuggets, announcing that he had struck it rich. Drinks were on the house that night, and a legend was born. From that day forward, Sublett devoted all his time to prospecting. He made frequent forays into the Guadalupes, always returning with a pouch of gold nuggets. He seemed flush with cash, spending freely in the towns of Monahans and Odessa. Sublett guarded his secret closely until his dying day. When he passed away in 1892 at the age of 82, he took the location of his mine to his grave. He left behind no map, no directions, nothing but a tantalizing mystery that has captivated the imagination of treasure hunters for over a century. It's hard to overstate the impact of Sublett's story on the local imagination. The legend has inspired countless expeditions into the Guadalupe Range. Prospectors and adventurers have combed the mountains from end to end, north to south, east to west. From old Fort Sumner in New Mexico to the mouth of the Pecos River where it joins the Rio Grande. Even Sublett's own son, Ross, joined the search. Ross claimed to have a dim childhood memory of his father taking him to the mine. He recalled seeing his father climb down a rope ladder into what he described as a crevice, emerging with gold nuggets. Ross remembered a tunnel at one end of this crevice or open cut. But memory can be a tricky thing, especially childhood memories. Despite spending many years searching, Ross Sublett was never able to relocate his father's mine. The secret remained locked away, hidden somewhere in the vast expanse of the Guadalupe Mountains. You might wonder, how is it possible for so many mines and treasures to become lost? And why are they so difficult to find again? To understand this, we need to look at the turbulent history of the American Southwest. The Spanish first entered this part of the continent in 1536, less than a decade after landing on the eastern coast of Mexico. For the next 287 years, they left an indelible mark on the land, a legacy of religious missions, brutal colonization, and relentless resource extraction. But while the Spanish were busy spreading their version of Christianity and collecting gold and silver, the indigenous peoples of the region were secretly planning a revolution. When the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 finally erupted, it caught many Spanish settlers off guard. Faced with the prospect of fleeing for their lives, many colonists buried their valuables, hoping to return for them later. They also sealed the entrances to the rich mines they had been working, determined to deny their wealth to their enemies. When American pioneers began to explore the region in the mid-19th century, they found tantalizing evidence of mineral wealth, rich placer deposits and promising ore outcroppings. But hostile Native American tribes often made it impossible to exploit these discoveries. Later, when the Native Americans had been confined to reservations and the land was more secure, many of the original locators tried to return to their old claims. But the landscape had changed. Landmarks had eroded or been destroyed. The exact locations of many promising sites had been lost to time and the unforgiving nature of the desert. This pattern of discovery, abandonment, and loss helps explain why so many legends of lost mines persist in the American West. The Guadalupe Mountains, with their forbidding terrain and violent history, provide the perfect backdrop for such tales. No story of lost treasure would be complete without a few ghostly tales, and the lost gold of the Guadalupes doesn't disappoint. Local goat herders who graze their flocks on the rocky, rattlesnake-infested mesas told strange stories about Dark Canyon. They said that on windy nights, when darkness cloaks the land, eerie lights suddenly leap from the ground among the oak trees lining the canyon wall. These mysterious illuminations are said to appear just across from Grapevine Spring, below the high mesa where the bones of Spanish soldiers lie. But that's not all. Some claim that on particularly dark and blustery nights the ghosts of the old Spanish captain and his soldiers rise from their graves. These spectral figures mount their phantom mules and gallop up and down the rocky canyon where the 18 loads of virgin gold are said to be buried. Like the strange lights, these apparitions vanish into the darkness as suddenly as they appear. Despite over a century of searching, the lost gold of the Guadalupes remains elusive. Is Sublett's mine the same as the Spanish Sierra de las Cenizas? Are either of them related to the rich deposits Geronimo spoke of? These questions continue to tantalize treasure hunters and historians alike. But the challenges are formidable. The Guadalupe Mountains cover a vast area, much of it rugged and difficult to access. The climate is harsh, water is scarce, and the terrain can be treacherous. Moreover, much of the range now falls within the boundaries of Guadalupe Mountains National Park, where mining and treasure hunting are strictly prohibited. This adds yet another obstacle for those dreaming of finding Sublett's lost mine or the legendary Spanish gold. So the next time you find yourself in West Texas, gazing up at the imposing silhouette of Guadalupe Peak, take a moment to wonder, what secrets might be hidden in those rugged canyons and wind-swept mesas? What tales of adventure, triumph, and tragedy echo through the ages in this harsh yet beautiful land? This has been the Southwest Desert. Until next time, keep exploring, keep wondering, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to solve the centuries-old mystery of the lost gold of the Guadalupes. Welcome to this Southwest Desert video on the story of Fray Marcos de Niza, a Franciscan priest who in 1539 embarked on a perilous journey through the American Southwest seeking the mythical 7 cities of gold, known as Cibola. This account comes directly from the detailed report Marcos wrote after his expedition. Through this episode, we will recount his remarkable tale just as Marcos described it in his own words centuries ago. Please leave a like or follow. If you enjoy this, hit the subscribe button to hear more great tales. Our story begins in 1539 within the Viceroyalty of New Spain, comprising Mexico and parts of Central America under Spanish colonial rule. For years, rumors had been circulating of wealthy indigenous cities somewhere north of Mexico, perhaps vestiges of the legendary 7 cities of gold sought since the 8th century, when 7 bishops supposedly fled Moorish forces in Spain with a contingent of followers. These persistent tales of cities abundant with gold, silver, and gems continued to ignite the imagination of Spanish conquistadors and Catholic missionaries in the 16th century. Eager to locate any grain of truth behind such legends, the Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza sponsored an expedition headed by Fray Marcos de Niza, a Franciscan priest who had previous experience in the Americas. Marcos readily accepted the challenging assignment, enticed both by missionary zeal and prospects of fame should he verify the existence of such rumored cities. Accompanying the priest was a Moorish former slave named Estevanico, referred to as Estevan, the lone survivor out of just 4 men who endured an arduous 9 years wandering the wilds of the American Southwest after a disastrous 1527 Spanish maritime expedition. Regaled during this odyssey as a powerful healer and magic worker, Estevan cultivated an aura of shamanistic authority that lent credibility to his second-hand sightings of wealthy cities, later dubbed Quibula. The Viceroy calculated Estevan could employ this stature and familiarity with indigenous peoples to help locate any evidence behind those persistent stories of cities rich in resources. On March 7, 1539, Fray Marcos, along with Estevan, another friar named Fray Honorado, and a large contingent of native porters, soldiers, and interpreters embarked north from the town of Culiacan in western Mexico towards the Arizona and New Mexico deserts. Estevan took the lead as the expedition's scout into the vast unknown terrain, while Fray Marcos followed around a month behind. Fray Marcos later wrote that he and Estevan agreed upon signals to indicate if the Moor encountered settlements reflecting different degrees of wealth as measured by Spanish standards. According to Marcos, if it were but a mean thing, Estevan should send me a white cross of 1 handful long, and if it were of any great matter, one of 2 handfuls long, and if it were a country greater and better than Nueva España, New Spain, he should send me a great cross. Working ahead of the main party, Estevan dispatched messengers within several days, confirming discovery of a new province 30 days' travel distance containing major cities, relaying a towering cross signaling expected bounties even greater than the Aztec capital. Encouraged by this news, Fray Marcos pressed northwards through difficult terrain and uncertain tribal receptions, still waiting to rendezvous with Estevan near the purported cities where they could both observe the rumored riches. However, before rejoining his scout, Marcos instead encountered fearful native runners, reporting that Estevan had been warned to stay away from a Zuni pueblo called Hawiku, but had refused to heed these threats. More wounded members from Estevan's group soon appeared, confirming the Moor had suffered mortal injuries in a violent clash at Hawiku provoked by his attempt to enter the settlement against explicit objections. Although deeply shaken by his scout's dramatic death, Fray Marcos insisted on pushing toward Cibola to finally witness this destination for himself, thereby justifying the entire expedition back to New Spain authorities. After 12 exhausting days trekking north, a determined Marcos reached a high enough vantage point to glimpse the mysterious Hawiku complex that had just spelled doom for the overconfident Estevan. In Marcos's report on Cibola to Viceroy Mendoza, he describes the settlement's impressive scale and architectural features as best his distant inspection allowed, claiming, "I followed my way until I came within sight of Cibola, maketh show to be a fair city, and is better seated than any I have seen. The houses are builded in order, all made of stone, with diverse stories and flat roofs." Yet still shaken by his previous courier's fate, Fray Marcos declined to fully approach Hawiku himself, admitting, "I returned with much more fear than Vituls." Though Marcos only distantly observed this reputedly resplendent settlement, he had now visually confirmed a sizable inhabited place broadly matching prior second-hand tales of large, wealthy cities in the north. His tantalizing relayed descriptions electrified the imagination of colonial Mexico. The next year, Marcos led an immense military contingent under Francisco Vázquez de Coronado on a full-fledged expedition to conquer the civilizations Marcos certified during his initial reconnaissance. Instead of submitting gold and silver riches for pillage, however, these Zuni and Hopi pueblos complexly organized their lives around agriculture, kin networks, and rich cultural traditions rather than European notions of status and material wealth so enthralling to the invaders. With no cities made of literal gold waiting to deliver riches into Spanish coffers, Coronado declared Marcos a deceiver and the expedition a debacle. Yet despite this indignity, Fray Marcos still trailblazed Spanish ambitions by verifying bases for legends of advanced settlements in the uncharted northern deserts, thereby opening the door for eventual expansive colonization and missionary activities in what is now New Mexico and Arizona. I hope you enjoyed this telling of what Marcos himself recorded during his trek towards the Seven Cities almost 500 years ago, when expectations and realities tragically collided on the remote fringes of Spain's ascendant New World empire. Thank you for joining me on another journey through the Southwest Desert. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like or comment. I would love to hear from you. Hit the subscribe button if you would like to join me on more adventures. I hope you enjoyed these lost Southwest tales. For more videos and playlists on the Southwest, check out my large catalog. Happy trails!